My sister begged me, "Please don't come to my wedding." "Why?" I asked. She sighed. "I don't want people to know you're just a cleaner." My mother added coldly, "We'll say you're dead. Don't contact us ever again." I left crying. The day of the wedding my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was my sister, my mother, and other relatives. I answered Luciana. She was crying inconsolably. She told me that Alejandro, her fiancé, had discovered everything and cancelled the wedding. He was furious and said he would never marry someone capable of denying her own family. Then my mother called. She yelled, accusing me of ruining everything. Alejandro's mother was asking for me, believing I was a kind nurse who had cared for her aunt in the hospital. I was in shock. Although she confused my position, she still remembered me from 10 years ago. When my father became bedridden, I abandoned my nursing studies to support the family. I accepted the only available job, cleaning in a municipal hospital. Meanwhile, my parents invested everything in Luciana's education. She has a future, they said. For years I endured humiliations. At family gatherings my uncle spoke to me with disdain. Luciana, upon meeting Alejandro, began to lie about me. She said I was a successful doctor abroad. When I received the invitation to her wedding, I felt a mixture of joy and fear. I wanted to be present, so I spent 2 months' salary on an elegant dress. But 3 days before, they summoned me to a cafe. My mother told me that the Garcias were an important family, and that they had said I had died in an accident. They asked me not to go to the wedding. I left the cafe trembling, crying in the taxi. I decided to respect their decision, however painful it was. I wouldn't go. Instead of helping my sister with the preparations, I packed my things to move to another city where no one knew who I was. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Alejandro. He asked to speak to me urgently. I ignored it. But on the wedding day, my cell phone started ringing nonstop. Everyone had different versions, but they all agreed on one thing. The wedding had been cancelled, and somehow I was at the center of the chaos. The same number called again. I hesitated, but I answered. It was Alejandro. He asked to see me. He said he was in the park in front of my building. I looked out. There he was in his wedding suit, sitting on a bench. I went down with my heart racing. He thanked me for coming down and explained everything. His mother had been hospitalized 3 months ago. I cleaned her room, and she remembered my kindness. Upon learning that his future wife didn't have a sister named Carmen, she was thrilled. But Luciana said I had died. Something didn't add up. That morning, Alejandro's mother went to the hospital and confirmed that I was still working there. She told her husband, who refused to allow the wedding. While Alejandro spoke, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. I asked him what he wanted me to do. He said his father wouldn't accept such a serious lie, much less out of shame towards someone's profession. His mother was devastated to imagine what I must have gone through. A luxury car stopped next to us. An elegant woman got out. It was Dona Elena Garcia. She approached and hugged me, excited to know I was alive. Then an older man with a serious expression got out. It was Mauricio Garcia, the patriarch of the family. "So you're Carmen," Mauricio said, assessing me. "My wife hasn't stopped talking about you since she left the hospital. She says you're an angel with the patients. I don't understand why your family would want to hide you." His words, though kind, were charged with indignation. He explained that he valued honesty and dignity in work. His own father had started as a street sweeper before building his empire. The situation became tense when my mother and Luciana appeared in the park. Upon seeing me with the Garcias, my mother paled, feigning surprise. Luciana, still in her wedding dress, approached Alejandro. "Please, let's go back to the church. The guests are waiting." But Mauricio intervened. "There will be no wedding today. I cannot allow my son to marry someone who denied her own sister out of shame." My mother tried to justify herself, but Dona Helena interrupted. "Misunderstanding? They told my son that Carmen had died. How is that misinterpreted?" A heated argument followed. My mother blamed me for ruining the wedding. Luciana cried desperately, and I felt invisible. It was then that Alejandro spoke. "Carmen, my mother told me you abandoned your nursing studies to care for your family. Is that true?" I nodded, surprised. She also told me you're still studying on your own. Our foundation has a scholarship program. I think you would be a perfect candidate. Mauricio nodded. A young woman who sacrifices her dreams for her family and keeps going deserves an opportunity. My mother and Luciana watched in disbelief. The shame they felt for my job now turned into envy. You can't do this. Luciana protested. It's my day. My wedding. No, it's not about Carmen's job, Alejandro said, but about your ability to erase her from your life. While they argued, I felt a strange calm. For the first time, someone valued my sacrifice. Dona Elena pulled me aside for a moment. The scholarship is for you, Carmen. For who you are. Not for what happened with Luciana. Her words gave me strength. I returned to the group. Mom, Luciana, for years I endured your contempt for my work. I sacrificed my dreams for you, and now you tried to erase me. I won't allow it anymore. The silence was absolute. Mauricio broke the moment. Madam, your daughter deserves respect. And you, miss, he looked at Luciana, have a lot to learn about loyalty. He turned to Alejandro. The decision is yours, son. Alejandro looked at Luciana with pain. I love you, but I can't marry someone who did this. Maybe in time, but today there will be no wedding. He left with his parents, leaving us in an uncomfortable silence. I hope you're satisfied, my mother spat. You've destroyed your sister's future. I'll never forgive you, Luciana added between tears. They left. I was left alone feeling sadness, guilt, and an unexpected sense of freedom. The following days were difficult. My family rejected me. My father called me from home, his voice broken. I love you, daughter. But this time you went too far. At the hospital, rumors flew. Some colleagues looked at me with curiosity, others with disdain. The supervisor called me. I feared the worst, but she surprised me. If you need a few days, you can take them. I thanked her but declined. Work was my only refuge. A week later, I received an email from the Garcia Foundation. They invited me to an interview for the scholarship. I hesitated. I didn't want to feel like they were giving me something out of pity. But I remembered Dona Elena's words. It was for who I am, not for what happened. I went to the interview in the best I had. A second-hand blue suit. 3 people were waiting for me. The program director, a hospital representative, and Dona Elena. How nice to see you, she said with a warmth that contrasted with the seriousness of the others. For an hour they asked me about my experience, education, and goals. I was honest. I didn't hide that I abandoned my studies out of necessity, but I explained how I continued learning on my own. Why invest in someone who already quit once? Asked the representative. I felt a knot, but I answered firmly. I never abandoned my dream, I only postponed it. I've worked 5 years cleaning rooms, observing, learning. Not a single day has passed without me studying something related to nursing. My answer seemed to touch something in them. At the end of the interview, Dona Elena accompanied me to the exit. You've done very well, Carmen, she said. And I want you to know something. Alejandro and Luciana are trying to work things out. The news surprised me. Really? I asked. She nodded. Your sister came to apologize. It was a brave gesture. Alejandro is willing to try again, but with one condition. She must reconcile with you. No, I didn't know what to say. I was glad that Luciana was reflecting, but I didn't want to be a condition for her to get her fiancé back. I don't want her to look for me just to please him, I replied. I understand, Dona Elena said. But sometimes we need an external push to recognize our mistakes. Give her time. 3 days later I received the confirmation. I had been accepted into the scholarship program. I would complete my nursing studies with a reduced schedule while continuing to work. It was a dream come true. I called my parents to share the news. My mother answered. We're not interested, Carmen. You've done enough damage, she said before hanging up. I cried for hours, unable to understand such rejection. My first day of class was terrifying and wonderful. At 29, I was the oldest in the group. A teacher stopped when she saw my name. Carmen Rodriguez, the Garcia Foundation scholar? She asked. I nodded and she smiled. I've heard very good things about you. The director says you're exceptional with patience. Those words gave me strength. I immersed myself in my studies with a passion that surprised everyone. Sleepless nights, the efforts were beginning to pay off. My grades were outstanding, and the teachers valued my hospital experience. Despite my achievements, the family wound remained open. My father wrote to me secretly. Luciana, despite what Dona Elena had told me, hadn't looked for me. I spent my birthday alone, remembering when we still felt like a family. And it was precisely that day that I received an unexpected visit. Alejandro was at my door. "Can I come in?" he asked. He entered seriously. "I've come for two things. First, to know how you're doing with the scholarship. My mother has been asking about you." I told him about my classes, my achievements. He seemed genuinely impressed. "The second reason is Luciana," he said after a pause. "We've been seeing each other, trying to rebuild what we had. But I set a condition. She must reconcile with you." He sighed. "She's ashamed, she's suffering, but her pride is holding her back. Your mother pressures her, blames her for losing the prestige she would have gained with the wedding." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I know that deep down you still care about your sister, and she cares about you too. This situation is destroying both of you." After he left, I thought a lot about what he said. I remembered when Luciana admired me, when she told me her secrets. Where did it all break down? I decided to attempt a reconciliation. Not for Alejandro, not for my mother, but for me, for the sister who was once my best friend. I sent her a message. "Can we talk?" Hours later, she replied, "I need to see you. Tomorrow we meet at a neutral cafe." I arrived early, mentally rehearsing what I would say. When Luciana entered, I was struck by her appearance. Dark circles, thinness, no trace of her usual confidence. "Thanks for coming," I said. She sat down, avoiding my gaze. The silence was uncomfortable until she looked up, her eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry, Carmen. I'm so sorry." Those sincere and vulnerable words began to melt the ice. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. It was my idea to say you were dead. Mom insists on blaming you, but I know the truth." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "I was afraid," she said. "Afraid of being rejected for coming from a humble family. I convinced myself it would only be for one day, that later we could invent some excuse to resurrect you," Luciana continued, lowering her gaze. "And Mom, she agreed from the beginning. She knew." I asked. Luciana nodded slowly. "You know how she is, obsessed with appearances. When I told her about the Garcias and their social position, she lost control. It was she who insisted on never mentioning you. She even invented a story about Dad being a successful businessman before he got sick." Every word hit me like a dagger. My own mother, willing to erase me for social ambition. "And Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He opposed it from the beginning. He argued with Mom, but since his illness he doesn't have much say at home." I took a sip of coffee, trying to take it all in. "And with Alejandro?" I asked. Luciana sighed. "I love him, but there's a lot of damage. He says he still loves me, but he doesn't trust me. His parents are completely opposed." "And you still want to marry him?" "Yes, but I've learned that no relationship is worth it if it requires betraying your family. I'm in therapy trying to understand why I did it." We continued talking for hours. We remembered our childhood, how we drifted apart after Dad's illness. Luciana confessed that she now understood what I had felt for years. "I experienced discrimination at the law firm where I work, and to think I did that to you, my own sister." For the first time in years, I felt like she really saw me. As we left, we hugged. Not everything was resolved, but it was a start. "Will you come see Dad?" she asked. "I'll think about it," I replied. 3 days later, I received an expected call from Mauricio Garcia. "Miss Rodriguez, I need to see you tomorrow. It's an important matter regarding your scholarship." I spent the night restless, afraid it was something negative. In his office, I was surprised to see Dona Elena, Alejandro, and a stranger. "Carmen, this is Dr. Ramirez, medical director of San Juan Hospital," Mauricio said. "I've heard very good things about you," the doctor said, smiling. They explained that San Juan Hospital would be inaugurating an accelerated program for specialized nursing. They wanted to offer me a position with paid internships. "Your case is unconventional," the doctor said. "But your qualifications and references are excellent." "Why me?" I asked. Because we value effort and perseverance, Mauricio replied. And you have demonstrated both. I left the office floating. It was more than I had ever dreamed of, but I also felt alone. I had no one to share this joy with. Then I decided to visit my father. I took advantage of the fact that my mother would be out. When I opened the door, he hugged me with tears in his eyes. My girl, you've returned. I told him about the scholarship, the studies, and the new opportunity. I always knew you would achieve great things, he said proudly. We were talking when the door burst open. What's she doing here? My mother asked as she entered. She's come to see Dad, I replied calmly, and to tell him that I've been accepted into San Juan Hospital. San Juan Hospital? She repeated, bewildered. I suppose it's important. Not just any hospital, she said. At that moment the doorbell rang. It was Luciana. Carmen, I didn't know you'd be here, she said nervously. I was telling him about the hospital, I replied. That's incredible, she said, her smile sincere. Not only that, I also have something to tell you. She took a deep breath. Alejandro and I have decided to try again. But this time, right? No lies, no rush. We're going to start from scratch. Build something real without hurting anyone. My mother tensed. So there will be no wedding? No, Mom, there will be no wedding, Luciana said firmly. We're going to start from scratch. Get to know each other better. Build a relationship based on honesty. She looked directly at me. And most importantly, Alejandro has set a non-negotiable condition. If we want to be together, it must be with the whole family. That includes you, especially you, Carmen. My mother paled. What do you mean by especially her? She asked suspiciously. Luciana stood up straighter than ever before in front of her. It means no more lies, no more shame for Carmen's work. Alejandro deeply admires what she has achieved, and his family does too. If we don't love and value her as she deserves, then there's no future with the Garcias. The silence was absolute. My mother seemed to be weighing her options. Finally, she turned to me. It seems you've earned the respect of important people, she said slowly. Perhaps we were unfair to you in some respects. It wasn't an apology, but knowing my mother, it was the closest thing I was going to get. Thank you, I replied simply. To close the moment, Luciana added, there's something else. Dona Elena wants to invite us to dinner next week. All of us as a family. To celebrate your acceptance into the San Juan Hospital program. The news hit like a bomb. A dinner with the Garcias at their house? My mother repeated incredulously. Yes, at their mansion in Las Lomas. It's a formal dinner, Luciana confirmed. I saw the conflict on her face. Finally, her ambition won. Of course we'll go. We're a family after all. The following week was tense. Mom bought new clothes for everyone and rehearsed conversations in front of the mirror. Luciana came frequently, bringing etiquette tips. I kept my distance, only visiting Dad when she wasn't there. Finally, the night arrived. Dona Elena sent a car for us. My excited mother gave us instructions. Don't talk unless you're asked a question. Don't mention money. And please don't touch anything that looks expensive. The mansion left us breathless. Impeccable gardens, fountains, uniformed staff. Dona Elena received us with elegance and warmth. The Rodriguez family all together. How nice to have you here, she said, hugging me first. Mauricio appeared behind her, solemn but cordial. Come in, please. There's someone special who wants to meet you. We entered the main hall, where several guests were already conversing. I recognized Dr. Ramirez, faculty professors, even my hospital supervisor. Everyone seemed to be there for me. Alejandro approached, greeted Luciana affectionately, then me and my parents. Thank you for coming tonight. It's very important for everyone. Mauricio called for silence, raising his glass. Dear friends and family, today we celebrate effort, dignity, and perseverance. He looked at me. Carmen Rodriguez represents all of that. A young woman who sacrificed her education for her family, who was never ashamed to work with dignity, and who today has been accepted into the prestigious San Juan Hospital program. The room erupted in applause. I saw my mother looking at me with an expression of confusion and contained pride. She didn't understand why her daughter, the cleaner, was the center of attention. But there's something else, Mauricio added. Our foundation has decided to create a permanent scholarship in Carmen's honor. Every year, a healthcare worker who demonstrates dedication and a spirit of self-improvement will receive support to complete their studies. Tears filled my eyes. From being the shame of my family, I had become an example for others. I saw my father crying, Luciana squeezing my hand, and my mother silently processing everything. During the formal dinner, I sat between Dr. Ramirez and Dona Elena, who introduced me to influential people. My mother, on the other side of the table, observed every detail with a mixture of surprise and silent admiration. When the guests dispersed, Mom approached me. Her voice was low, as if she were revealing a secret. I don't understand why they value you so much. You were just a cleaner. It hurt, but it also made something clear. My mother had never really known me. Because they see what you never wanted to see, I told her. That a person's worth isn't in their title, but in their integrity, their effort, and how they treat others. But I thought the Garcias only saw status, she whispered. Some do, but they know what it takes to get ahead. Mauricio grew up in poverty. I saw a slight change in her expression. It wasn't a complete transformation, but a crack in her rigidity. The nurses at San Juan earn well, she commented, as if searching for a justification. Yes, Mom, I'll earn well and have a respected job. But that's not what's important. What's important is that I'll be able to help people like Dad when he was sick. She looked down and for the first time she didn't say anything. She just nodded. I looked over to where my father was chatting animatedly with Mauricio. He was always proud of me. You know, even when I cleaned bathrooms. My mother watched him silently. He was always a better person than me, she admitted in a whisper. It was the closest thing to introspection I had ever heard from her. The evening continued with conversations and plans. Dr. Ramirez explained that the program would include rotations through different specialties. You have a natural talent for caring for patients, he told me. Your cleaning experience gave you a unique vision of the hospital. Value it. Near the end of the night, Alejandro took Luciana's hand and announced, We've decided to resume our plans, but in a different way. Luciana, visibly nervous, smiled. We'll get married next year, after an honest and real courtship. My mother almost fainted with emotion. But Mauricio spoke firmly. This union will only be possible if it's based on respect and honesty. All parties must be valued without exception. His gaze rested on my mother, who nodded solemnly. I understood that he would never allow me to be excluded again. At the end of the night, while we waited for the car, Dona Elena hugged me. Carmen, I'm so proud of you. When I was hospitalized, you were the only one who treated me with well like a human being. Never forget that gift. In the car, silence reigned. Dad squeezed my hand tenderly. Luciana, pensive, looked out the window. And my mother processed. Upon arriving, while Luciana and Dad went inside, my mother stopped me on the porch. Carmen, she said with effort, I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. I don't deserve your forgiveness. It wasn't a complete apology, but coming from her, it was a miracle. We're learning, Mom, I replied. We're all learning. 3 months later, my life was different. The program at San Juan Hospital was demanding but rewarding. My professors praised my combination of experience and theory. I left my cleaning job, but I kept in touch with my former colleagues. Some, inspired, had resumed their studies. My relationship with Luciana was improving every day. We had recovered some of our closeness. She and Alejandro were building something authentic. Sometimes she asked me for advice, valuing my perspective for the first time. Dad visited me often, bringing sweets, books, small gestures that demonstrated his silent love. My mother had changed her discourse. She no longer spoke with disdain about my work. Now she said with contained pride, My daughter, the nurse. One day while I was studying, I received an unexpected visit. It was Mauricio. Can I come in? There's something important I want to discuss with you. We sat in my small living room. Your progress has been exceptional, and we want to offer you an opportunity. 3 months at a hospital in Barcelona, learning advanced techniques. International training. I was speechless. Why me? Mauricio smiled. Because you've overcome obstacles with dignity. Because you inspire. And because many need to hear your story. Sometimes the greatest limitations come from our own families. His words pierced me. I thought of my mother, my father, Luciana, and the Carmen from before, studying hidden between cleaning shifts. I accept, I said with emotion, and I promise I'll make this opportunity count. I never doubted you, Carmen, he replied. Never. Today, 3 years have passed since my family asked me not to go to the wedding. And now, as I put on my specialized nurse uniform in the ICU of San Juan Hospital, I remember everything I've lived through. Barcelona transformed my vision. I learned techniques, but above all, to treat patients with dignity, regardless of their condition. I implemented protocols that improved care in our unit. Luciana and Alejandro got married in a small, sincere ceremony. She now works with pro bono cases helping vulnerable people. I was her maid of honor. Our tears sealed the peace. My mother, still attached to appearances, started getting involved in charity events at the hospital. Recently, Dona Elena told me, if my daughter dedicates her life to caring for others, the least I can do is support her. My parents' pride makes me cry. I always knew you'd make it, daughter. He always tells me. The Garcia Foundation expanded the scholarship program based on my story. Today, 5 workers are studying thanks to that opportunity. They invite me to share my experience, and seeing their eyes full of hope is one of my greatest gifts. 2 days ago, while caring for a critically ill patient, I saw a young cleaning lady enter. She was watching everything attentively. At the end of my shift, I approached her. Are you interested in medicine? Her eyes shone. It's my dream, but I don't have the education. I told her about the foundation, about my story. Because sometimes the rejection of those we love most becomes the impulse we need to discover our true worth.